Welcome to Night World. Imran Vumor arrived at the summit of Mount Cinder with two things: a worn duffel bag containing enough supplies for a 3-month isolation, and a burden of professional guilt that weighed more than the entire mountain. A retired meteorologist, he had once been a respected name in atmospheric modeling, until a catastrophic miscalculation 3 years ago led to the failure of an early warning system, costing several lives in a coastal flash flood. The public disgrace had been absolute, stripping him of his career and his confidence. Now, he was here, seeking penance or perhaps just oblivion, accepting a contract to manage the Aetheria Atmospheric Research Station, a fully automated facility perched on the highest, most desolate peak in the state. The station itself was a fortress against the elements, a squat, angular structure of reinforced steel and satellite dishes, bolted deep into the rock. It felt less like a scientific outpost and more like a minimalist bunker designed to withstand the end of the world. His immediate predecessor, a quiet young woman named Clara, had left unexpectedly a month ago, citing only unforeseen personal issues in a clipped, nervous email. The remote hiring agency had been suspiciously quick to take Imran on. He knew why. Nobody wanted to spend a winter here, cut off from everything, at the edge of the navigable world. Inside, the station was clean, humming with the quiet activity of servers and sensors. The heart of the Aetheria station was the Environmental Data Core, EDC, a massive array of instruments designed to measure every minute fluctuation in the atmosphere: pressure, humidity, wind shear, and most crucially, the incredibly faint shifts in the planet's magnetic and Schumann resonance fields. Imran's job was simple: keep the generators running and ensure the data stream flowed uninterrupted back to the university lab. It was mindless, mechanical work, the perfect antidote to the high-stakes, stressful career he had ruined. The first week was monotony wrapped in silence. The mountain air was thin and sharp. The views were breathtaking: miles of white peaks and pine forests stretching into the hazy horizon. But the isolation was absolute. The only break in the routine was the daily check of the remote sensors, requiring a bracing trek across the exposed platform where the wind ripped at his thick parka. He had no phone signal, only a satellite uplink for official communications. The anomaly appeared on the EDC readouts on his 8th day. Imran was poring over the magnetic field graphs, expecting the usual gentle, predictable diurnal curve. Instead, he saw a series of sharp, jagged spikes that had occurred 3 days prior, right at 3:17 p.m. They weren't electrical or solar flare activity. The signature was too complex, too localized, and accompanied by a corresponding dip in barometric pressure that contradicted the stable weather pattern outside. It looked like the magnetic field had experienced a sudden, violent hiccup. He dismissed it as instrument drift or a fault in the new sensor array. But the data repeated. The next night, reviewing the logs, he found another spike, less intense, but with the same eerie, non-physical signature. This one coincided with a strange weather event recorded in the regional logs: a sudden, intensely localized, unforecast lightning strike that had shattered a communications tower in the valley 40 miles away. Imran pulled up the seismic data. No tremors. No physical cause. The spike was an atmospheric event that defied all known meteorological laws. Driven by a familiar, frantic need for answers that was both his curse and his calling, Imran began to cross-reference the atmospheric data with external events. He spent hours sifting through regional news archives, police blotters, and emergency reports, using the station's high-speed uplink. He focused on the moment of the first massive spike at 3:17 p.m., 3 days ago. The news was chillingly specific. At precisely 3:17 p.m. in the town of Aspen Creek, right in the center of the sensor's range, a massive public riot had broken out at a city council meeting, escalating into a violent confrontation that required police intervention. The reports focused on the unprecedented level of public rage. Imran's hand shook as he scrolled through the reports. It was an impossible, irrational connection, the kind of crazy leap he would have mocked 3 years ago. Yet, the data was undeniable: a sudden spike in atmospheric magnetic energy and pressure fluctuation, coinciding exactly with a massive, localized surge of human rage. He found a corresponding, though less dramatic, correlation for the second spike: a sudden, widely reported moment of extreme mob panic at a local college campus. His scientific mind fought the conclusion, but the data won. The Aetheria Station was not just measuring the Earth's weather, it was recording the Earth's emotional barometer. The Earth itself was reacting to localized human suffering, and the station's hypersensitive sensors were picking up the atmospheric fallout of collective, intense feeling. The spikes weren't solar flares or storms, they were human rage, crystallized into a weather event. The isolation began to warp the boundaries of his reality. He stopped trusting the glass thermometer outside and started trusting the invisible, whispering data on the EDC screen. He realized that the Earth wasn't just recording the emotion was causing the phenomenon. The raw, unfiltered output of human violence was momentarily overloading the local magnetic field. And then came the true realization, the kind that steals sleep and sanity. The weather wasn't reflecting the emotions, it was responding to them. The lightning strike that followed the first wave of rage was not a coincidence. It was a reaction. Imran remembered the sudden departure of his predecessor, Clara. He found her personal logs hidden beneath a server rack. Her final entries were not about instrument failure, but about sound. She wrote of hearing a low, continuous wail that seemed to emanate from the very bedrock of the mountain. She described the wail as the sound of the planet weeping. And in her very last, frantic entry, she described the feeling of being judged. The Earth is listening. It knows what we have done, and the judgment is coming. Imran looked out the reinforced window at the vast, silent, pristine landscape. The sky was clear, the wind calm. But on the EDC screen, the pressure graph was showing a slow, steady, continuous downward trend, a pressure dip unlike any natural pattern. This was not the sharp spike of rage or panic. This was slow, inexorable, crushing despair. And it was growing. Imran knew that if rage caused lightning, and panic caused sudden fog, then this massive, building wave of despair was building toward a catastrophic, global, and utterly final weather event. The question was, where was this despair coming from, and what kind of meteorological cataclysm would the Earth unleash when it finally burst? The slow, continuous descent of the barometric pressure on the EDC screen became Imran's new fixation. It was a digital countdown to an environmental disaster, driven not by physics but by the slow, crushing weight of human sorrow. Imran calculated that if the rate of descent continued, the pressure would reach a critical, catastrophic low point in approximately 2 weeks. The resulting weather event would be unlike anything recorded in history. He needed to find the source of the despair. He used the station's high-speed uplink to sift through every major event occurring within the sensor's range, a 200-mile radius stretching across cities, farmlands, and coastal towns. He was searching for a pervasive, collective tragedy that would account for the magnitude of the pressure drop. He looked for war, famine, economic collapse, or a major natural disaster. He found none of the usual culprits. The news cycle was typical: political squabbles, minor crimes, and financial anxieties. Nothing that screamed global collapse of spirit. The only anomaly he found was a series of local reports about the Riverwood Psychiatric Hospital, a massive, antiquated facility nestled in a secluded valley town about 150 miles south. The hospital was under investigation for systemic patient neglect and abuse, and a massive class action lawsuit had just been filed. The details were disturbing: years of silence, isolation, and patient suffering finally brought to light. Imran felt a chill. The EDC's geographic data pointed directly to that valley. Could the collective, sustained, and amplified misery of hundreds of institutionalized patients be enough to fundamentally alter the Earth's magnetic and pressure fields? It was a frightening, almost mystical idea, but it was the only one that fit the data. The Earth wasn't reacting to a disaster, it was reacting to sustained human cruelty. As he worked, the effects of the mounting despair began to manifest on the mountain. The sky remained clear, but the atmospheric phenomena became subtle, insidious, and deeply unsettling. The wind, which was usually a sharp, clean force, now carried a strange, low hum, a sound that resonated in the chest cavity, not the ears. His scientific instruments, designed for precision, began to break down. The seismographs started recording constant vibrations, not tremors, but a high-frequency shivering of the bedrock itself. Imran remembered Clara's logbook. She had written about a wail from the bedrock. He realized the mountain wasn't just recording the despair, it was absorbing it, and the resulting strain was causing the mountain to literally vibrate with grief. The earth was in pain. His isolation became torturous. He started seeing things in the long, dark corridors of the station. Fleeting shadows that weren't there when he turned the light on. He began to hear whispers carried on the strange wind, faint and unintelligible, but sounding like pleading, distant voices, the spectral echoes of the patients at Riverwood, magnified and carried across the miles by the highly charged atmosphere. The emotional resonance of the house had broken his great-uncle's mind. The raw, uncontained emotional energy of the earth was beginning to break his. One afternoon, he stepped outside to check the generators. The air was unnaturally heavy, the density of the atmosphere feeling like a thick, wet blanket. The sky was an impossible, sickly shade of yellow-gray. The wind was dead calm, yet the massive dish antennas on the roof were creaking and groaning as if fighting an immense, invisible pressure. When he returned to the EDC screen, the data had spiked again, but this time it wasn't a sudden burst of rage. It was a spike of pure, concentrated fear. The jump in magnetic resonance was so massive that the graph line shot straight off the chart. Simultaneously, the pressure drop accelerated sharply. The point of catastrophe was now only a few days away. Imran scrambled back to the news archives, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He found the report instantly. At the Riverwood Psychiatric Hospital, a fire had broken out in the West Wing, trapping several dozen patients. The fire department was struggling to reach the remote location. This was the climax. The despair had been building for years, recorded as the slow barometric descent. The sudden fear of the fire, the final, panicked emotion, had caused the critical magnetic spike. The Earth's reaction was imminent and going to be cataclysmic. He tried to contact the university lab to warn them. He typed out a frantic report detailing the correlation between the Riverwood fire's emotional spike and the critical pressure drop. The reply from the chief technician, a woman named Dr. Helen Vance, was dismissive. "Your data is corrupt, Imran. The patterns are too nonlinear. You're seeing things that aren't there. Report back with rational readings, or we're sending a team up to relieve you." His past failure was haunting him, making his impossible warnings sound like the ravings of an isolated, broken man. He was alone, with a few days left before the Earth retaliated against the collective despair of humanity. Imran knew what he had to do. He had to stop the source of the emotional energy. He had to go to Riverwood. The meteorologist who once tried to predict the weather now realized he had to change the emotional climate to save the world. He grabbed his keys, his survival gear, and the printed EDC charts that were his only proof, leaving the humming, whispering station behind, descending the mountain into the rising dread of the atmosphere. Imran's descent from Mount Cinder was a frantic, terrifying race against the collapsing atmosphere. The thin, sickly yellow-gray sky provided an oppressive twilight, and the wind, though constant, no longer sounded like air moving over rock. It had taken on that low, unnatural hum the sound Clara had identified as the wail of the weeping planet, now amplified and vibrating through the chassis of his aging 4x4. The mountain road, usually a grueling 8-hour drive, felt like a funnel into the heart of the world's misery. As he dropped in elevation, the subtle atmospheric effects became violently localized. He drove through patches of air so dense the headlights struggled to cut through, followed immediately by areas of unnerving, absolute vacuum where the sound of his engine was momentarily swallowed. The trees by the roadside, though firmly rooted, appeared to be shivering in response to the deep, silent tremor in the bedrock. The air was charged with a palpable tension, a static buildup of emotion so raw it felt like his skin was crawling. Imran checked the EDC printouts he'd brought with him. The pressure drop was accelerating, and the magnetic field was wildly unstable. According to his projection, the catastrophic atmospheric burst would happen sometime in the next 36 hours. He knew his warning to Dr. Vance at the university was useless. He had to reach the Riverwood Psychiatric Hospital and find a way to neutralize the emotional energy at its source. He finally reached the valley floor, leaving the cold, clear air of the high altitude for a landscape choked with a strange, unnatural fog. It wasn't moisture condensation, it was thick, low-lying, and seemed to cling specifically to low-lying structures and valleys, the places where sound and misery tended to settle. The town of Riverwood was nestled deep in the mist. It was a place of economic hardship and faded facades, its life seemingly overshadowed by the massive, grim presence of the psychiatric hospital. The facility itself was an imposing, decaying brick structure, surrounded by high chain-link fences and dense woods. It looked like a castle designed for containment. The fog here was thickest, wrapping the hospital in a heavy, silent blanket. Imran pulled his truck to the side of the nearly deserted main road. He could see the wing where the fire had been scorched black, with shattered windows. Emergency crews had left hours ago. As he got closer, the acoustic effect intensified. The fog wasn't silent, it was filled with the whispers Clara had mentioned, no longer distant but close and pervasive. They were not words, but the faint, overlapping sounds of pleading, whimpering, and low, defeated murmurs, the collective sonic signature of institutionalized despair. The atmosphere was so charged with suffering that Imran felt a crushing weight settle onto his chest, a psychological empathy so strong it threatened to incapacitate him. This was the source of the pressure drop. He scaled a low section of the perimeter fence, his mind focused solely on the scientific solution. He was no hero or social worker, he was a technician trying to fix a planetary error. He moved toward the main administration building, relying on the memory of the hospital's layout he'd seen in the news archives. Inside, the hospital was dark and labyrinthine, smelling of burnt wood, disinfectants, and old human confinement. The whispers were deafening here, seeming to follow him from the tiled floor, the cracked ceiling, and the peeling paint of the walls. He was walking through a physical manifestation of long-term trauma. The emotional weight of the place was so acute that the few remaining light bulbs flickered with erratic intensity, the very energy of the building reacting to the atmosphere of sadness. Imran found the records room, located deep in the basement. It was a cold, windowless space filled with metal shelves of manila files. He was looking for the names, the stories, the key pieces of human experience that could explain the collective weight of the despair. He knew that to neutralize the energy, he couldn't just throw money at the situation like his colleague Javed, from the previous story, he needed to somehow acknowledge the deep, unaddressed human suffering. As he searched, the door to the records room slowly, deliberately creaked shut behind him. He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. The handle was locked. Panic, the very emotion that had caused the mob panic spike, threatened to overwhelm him. He tried the handle, but it was jammed tight. Then, from the darkness between the metal shelves, a figure coalesced. It was a tall, skeletal man in faded hospital pajamas, his face a mask of endless fatigue and vacant eyes. It wasn't a spectral ghost, but a physical condensation of accumulated misery, a shadow born from the sheer longevity of institutional despair. This entity didn't make a sound. It simply stood there, emanating a psychic weight of hopelessness that instantly transferred itself into Imran's mind. The entity didn't speak, it simply imparted its reality, years of isolation, the crushing lack of hope, the endless cycle of medication and confinement. The pressure was immense. Imran saw the catastrophic flood he had indirectly caused 3 years ago, but amplified and twisted. This flood, the Earth's final tear, would consume the entire continent. The entity was demanding that Imran join its despair, that he accept the inevitable ruin of all things. Imran stood rigid, paralyzed by the overwhelming magnitude of this final, concentrated despair. He had come here to save the world by fixing a scientific equation, but he was facing a moral and emotional reckoning. He was trapped in the heart of the Earth's pain, and the price of escape was his own mind. Imran was trapped. The basement door was locked, and the spectral entity before him, the physical condensation of years of institutional despair, was crushing his will. It demanded not money or revenge, but surrender, the acceptance that all human endeavor ends in suffering and ruin. The air, thick with unacknowledged grief, felt heavier than water. He saw his professional failure, the coastal flood, and his guilt, not as personal events, but as small, insignificant notes in a global symphony of misery. The Earth's final catastrophic weather event was the planet's attempt to cleanse itself of the human infection of sorrow. He tried to shout, to plead, but the oppressive silence of the records room swallowed his voice. He realized that the entity, born from neglect and silence, could only be fought with its opposite, acknowledgement and noise. Gathering the last reserves of his professional focus, Imran didn't look at the entity's face, he looked at the files. The paper records, the physical proof of every single ignored life, were the entity's anchors. He lunged toward a metal shelf, his hands tearing through decades of brittle manila folders. He began to pull them down, throwing the papers into the air. "No," Imran croaked, his voice cracking against the psychic pressure. "You are not an error. You are not a ghost. You are real." He snatched up a file labeled John Doe, 1987 to 2023, and stared at the handwritten notes detailing the patient's quiet, solitary decline. "This is real. John Doe's suffering is real." With each file he acknowledged, the entity wavered. It retreated slightly, recoiling from the sudden, jarring noise of the papers scattering and the power of a single, external human voice validating its source. He understood the ritual now. The Earth was reacting because the suffering was unaddressed. The magnetic fields overloaded because the human collective had pretended the misery didn't exist. Imran, the man who had once been paralyzed by his own guilt, now used that same deep sense of failure to fuel his desperation. He ripped down more files, shouting the few legible names. "We saw you. The Earth hears you. We know what they did." The sheer, physical noise of the falling paper and Imran's raw voice, amplified by the silent, emotion-charged air, was a corrosive force against the silent misery. The shadowy figure dissolved with a silent, writhing spasm of frustration, collapsing into a cloud of swirling dust motes that settled instantly, leaving the records room looking only messy, not malevolent. As the figure vanished, the crushing psychic pressure lifted. Imran staggered back, gasping for air. The silence that returned was still deep, but it was no longer heavy or oppressive, it was merely quiet. He felt the atmosphere shift immediately. He checked the EDC printout in his pocket. The sharp descent of the barometric pressure had abruptly leveled off. The catastrophic trajectory was halted. The Earth had registered the acknowledgement. Exhausted but victorious, Imran found the maintenance log for the door and, using a loose piece of wire, managed to jimmy the lock open. He stumbled back into the misty valley. The sickly yellow-grey sky was slowly, almost imperceptibly, lightening, giving way to a pale, hopeful dawn. The whispers were gone. The wail of the mountain was silent. Imran did not return to the Aetheria station. He drove directly to the nearest federal courthouse, carrying the files, the EDC printouts, and the harrowing, undeniable truth of what he had witnessed. He spent the next year working with lawyers and reporters, using the hospital's records and his own scientifically validated data to expose the systemic abuse at Riverwood. His testimony, linking human suffering to measurable geophysical events, was initially met with ridicule, but the sheer volume of his evidence, backed by the recovered files, eventually forced a full investigation and complete restructuring of the facility. He never returned to meteorology. He knew his former profession was too narrow, too clean for the complex, emotional reality of the world. Imran Vamar, the scientist who had tried to predict the wind, now worked as a quiet, relentless advocate for the unseen and unheard. He understood that the Earth itself is listening, and that the true safety of the planet lies not in perfect atmospheric modeling, but in the simple, loud acknowledgement of human suffering. His guilt over the coastal flood never left him, but it no longer paralyzed him. It became a solemn dedication to ensuring that no suffering, no matter how remote, would ever again be allowed to reach the point where the planet itself felt compelled to intervene. He was a new kind of scientist, one who understood that cruelty is not just a moral failing, it is an environmental hazard. And sometimes, the only thing that can save the world is a single, honest voice breaking the silence. Subscribe for more mystery and engaging video. This is just beginning. I will upload 2 or 3 videos daily. Okay, thanks for watching.